Terry Goldsworthy is a criminologist and professor from Bond University, and he reckons there's a lot more that needs to be done. He's on the line now. G'day, Terry.
Yeah, hi, Bill.
It's almost, as we talked about a year on from the Kate Ledbetter and Matty Field, they were mown down by young criminals in Alexandra Hills on Australia Day. But we're still talking about this issue of youth crime, and we've even had the task force headed by the former Commissioner Bob Atkinson. Why are we still talking about it?
Well, I think it's indicative of a wider issue that we have in Queensland in terms of crime. I mean, crime over the last financial year has gone up 7%, the crime rate generally. And if you look within that, the rate of break-in is up 18%, the rate of stolen vehicles is up 13%, the number of robberies has increased by 29%. So you've got that general increase in crime, which includes adults and juveniles. Then within that, the interesting thing that stands out to me is when you look at participation in terms of certain offences, youth offenders, those from 10 to 17, make up 16% of all offenders that we deal with in Queensland. But when you go and look at break-and-enters, stolen cars and robberies, they count for more than 50% of the offenders in those crime categories. So, there was a reduction in the number of charges against juvenile offenders last year, but we are seeing they are massively overrepresented in those serious offences like robbery, stolen vehicles, etc., and that's where the problem lies.
What was your first reaction when you heard about this horror North Lakes home invasion? It's resonated with a lot of people, same way as it did with the Ledbetters a year ago.
Well, a couple of things. One, my time in the police, generally people who are breaking the houses try to do it during the day for the very reason that people aren't home. What we're seeing here is a trend amongst youth offenders that they do the opposite. They break in at night when people are home, specifically to obtain the keys to vehicles, which they can then steal to go out and go on their crime sprees. The fact that these, allegedly these young people were prepared to go armed into someone's house with knives, it just says to you, well, what do you expect to happen when someone defends their property, as we would all probably do? And I think, it's a terrible situation. And it is a problem. The government needs to realise and get serious about this. I mean, if you look at the Atkinson report, out of the 6 recommendations or reforms that were put in place back in January 2021, 5 of them, they really couldn't come away with any substantive evidence to say that they'd worked. They used words like no firm conclusions, no evidence that justice has caused any effect, supported in principle, but, no real impact. And that's through the entire report. And the real eye-catcher for me is the electronic monitoring devices, where they spent $11 million on getting these things in. And in the period that they reviewed, they issued 3. Now, to put that in perspective for your listeners, the police proceeded against 47,000 youth offenders in the last financial period. And when we had these electronic devices rolled out as the big signature item, we can now be told in the report that they've issued a total of 3 for $11 million.
But how can they stand up then, the state government, and say they're doing all they can to crack down on the young thugs, and they actually sounds like they're whinging about being criticised for locking up too many, they say. Well, do you believe any of that?
Well, look, I mean, if you look at the report, it was quite, difficult to read in terms of pulling out what's actually occurred since these reforms came in. The bail one, to me was hard to read because there's no comparison to what happened before they put the presumption of bail in. All they talked about is what had happened since they'd put it in. So you've got nothing to compare it to. What we did see come out of that report is out of the 800 or so offenders who applied for bail after the police refused it, more than 50% got bail anyway and got out. If you look at the electronic monitoring devices, the way it was designed was to be on compliant children, 16 to 17, who had a supportive guardian, who are in a stable home environment. Well, they're not the ones who are going to offend. So why would we waste our time putting those devices on people who are highly unlikely to offend? And when you compare it to adult offenders, we put the electronic monitoring devices on the high-risk DV and sexual assault offence predators. We don't put them on the ones who we don't think aren't going to offend.
Well, the Justice Minister, Leanne Lennard, was wheeled out yesterday, and she spoke on the radio here today about trumpeting the government's, you mentioned it, the presumption against bail line. But As we understand it now, these alleged offenders in North Lakes were out on bail. They were all living in a halfway house. They were known to police. And then the other two that aren't charged with murder and attempted murder, as I said, on bail, but they were given bail for stealing offences earlier in the day. Does that raise a few alarms as to, A, if they're in a halfway house and they were in a 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. Supervision, what they were doing out all day and then after hours? Won't there be questions asked about that?
Well, there should be. I mean, clearly, people are getting bail and still flaunting it. And, if we go back to that report, those initiatives, the community be protected against serious repeat offenders was one of the keystones of those responses from the government. The report said that the effectiveness of this provision cannot be substantiated by any available data. So they cannot show that they've actually improved the protection of the community through those measures they put in place. They would have been probably the people you would want trackers on, who you could then go, oh, they've left the halfway house. What's going on there? I mean, I really think that the government needs to reintroduce the breach of bail offence. I mean, for police now to act on someone for breach of bail, it is possible, but it's a very complicated way they've got to go around doing it. What we simply need is to put that offence back in place. So if the police had to caught these two outside of the halfway house and breach their conditions, they can just arrest them, put them straight back into custody.
All right, we can talk for a bit longer. If you've got a quick 30 seconds, where are we going? Where do we address it? Where does it need to be addressed urgently?
Well, I think, we need to make sure that the law enforcement aspect is spot on, and then alongside that is there needs to be money put into the therapeutic kind of processes to stop the offending cycle. So the law and order will stop the short-term offending cycle. Long-term, to deal with these recidivist offenders, we've got to have some kind of therapeutic assistance for them, or when they get out of jail, they're just going to go and re-offend again.
All right. Appreciate your time. Thanks very much, Terry.
Thanks, Bill.